Hello everyone, welcome to week 4. So we will be discussing about ethnographic methods in design research in this particular week. So let's start with foundations of ethnography in the context of design. In this particular lecture, our key learning outcomes are understanding ethnography as a qualitative methodology rooted in cultural anthropology and the evolution into design research, and as a result the kind of modifications which has happened. Distinguish ethnography from other methods like interviews, surveys and so on. Identify the 4 principles: immersion, holism, emic perspective and thick description. Evaluate how design ethnography differs from classical anthropologic ethnography in scope, duration and outputs. So, what is ethnography? Ethnography comes from the Greek word ethnos, which stands for people, plus graphene, to write. It is a qualitative research methodology rooted in cultural anthropology. The researcher immerses themselves in a community or setting over an extended period, observing, participating and documenting everyday practices to understand the culture, meanings and social structures that shape behavior. So the classical approach from which ethnography has been drawn, which is the cultural anthropology, it required prolonged immersion. So it can imply months of immersion or years of immersion in the field. However, in case of design research, ethnography cannot be conducted for such a long time. So although we are talking about prolonged immersion in design ethnography, it does not last as long as the classical approach. So in this particular context, it will last for couple of days only. So the classical approach required prolonged immersion, which was about months or years in the field, participation in daily life of the people whom you were observing and doing ethnographic research with, production of thick comprehensive cultural description, emphasize understanding behavior through the lens of cultural meaning. So the design ethnography which we are concerned with, it consists of 4 core principles: immersion, holism, emic perspective and thick description. So let's talk about immersion first. In immersion, we are going for extended sustained presence in the field, which in terms of design means couple of days. So it is not about short visits or lab studies. We design ethnography for 2 weeks to 8 weeks in the field. Sometimes it is also for 3 days, 4 days. It depends on the design context and how much immersion is required. When you are doing this immersion part of it, how ethnography becomes different from contextual inquiry is, you in contextual inquiry you again go to the field in the context and do inquiry against a certain topic, whereas in ethnography your immersion is much deeper and for much longer. Contextual inquiry does not last that long. Contextual inquiry, as the name suggests, it is inquiring in the context, whereas ethnography involves complete immersion and shadowing the person for couple of days or up to 8 weeks. The next one is about holism. Understanding behavior in full context: culture, history, environment, relationships, norms. Seek patterns that span activities. Emic perspective: understanding from the insider's view how participants make sense of their world, understanding meaning that drive behavior. And thick description: so rich narrative accounts that preserve context, nuance and complexity, grounded in evidence but moves beyond data to interpretation. So let's compare ethnography with other qualitative methods which we have already spoken about. So ethnography versus contextual inquiry, interviews and observation. So in ethnography, the most important part, it is the sustained immersion. This sustained immersion, in case you are trying to design for, let's say, a hospital environment, can last for months also. In most other contexts, it lasts for a couple of days. However, it is sustained, whereas contextual inquiry, we are targeting about a 1 hour session. Interviews are also targeted to around a 1 hour session. When we are doing observational studies, it is again structured. The main difference between ethnography and observation is, in observational study, again it is bounded study of a certain object, you again do this observational study for a certain time frame. In ethnographic research, actually observation can become part of it. However, the way in which it becomes part of it is little different. So ethnography is a much bigger package as compared to any of the others, and all these other methodologies can actually absorbed within ethnography. The setting in case of ethnography is again the participants' community. In the contextual inquiry, it can be at the place where the context lies. It can be the workplace, it can be the home, wherever the context lies. Interviews can be conducted in labs or office. It can also be conducted in the home of a person. However, an interview does not really need the context to be present. When the context is present, we call it as contextual inquiry. The observation, it again happens in the field where the action is happening. In ethnography, you get different kinds of data. You get the data which is arising out of participation of the researcher in the processes. Your observational data, it can have interviews also. In contextual inquiry, mostly we have observational data plus interview data. In interviews, we have certain verbal recall. So I will be asking a question and my participant will recall what they have done, and it is mostly in verbal format. Observational studies, we are trying to observe behavioral patterns over there. The goal of ethnography is to understand the culture and the meanings, why something is happening the way it is happening, what are the cultural underlayers which are creating the meaning that is playing in this particular context. In contextual inquiry, we are trying to understand the workflow, how work is flowing and how decisions are being taken. In interviews, I am trying to understand the needs of the participants, their experiences around something. In observation, I am trying to describe the behavior frequencies. So how often somebody bends down for doing this activity, what are the different postures that they will be taking, what are the behaviors that they are doing, and what is the frequency of these behavior. So the key strength of ethnography is it helps you in mapping down the cultures, the value, the meanings which are invisible in interaction. So the person might not be able to verbalize it, but when you are immersed in this context for a long time frame, you are able to observe them, ask questions and get clarifications. Contextual inquiry, it again helps in capturing tacit knowledge. It also helps in capturing real-time context. Interviews, they are scaled so that it can happen in a short time. You can get a lot of information, and they are a systematic process of gathering information. Observation, again they are quantifiable patterns. So when you are doing this design ethnography as compared to classical anthropology, in design ethnography, we have a bounded ecosystems. There will be a certain workplace or community space or product users. I will at max spend 8 weeks in the field, and the goal over here is to inform design, solve specific problems. Whereas in classical anthropology, the entire culture or society is being studied. I might spend more than a year in the field. The goal over here is to produce monographs, contribute to anthropological theory, which is about understanding of culture, understanding of meaning creation, understanding of values for that particular culture. So now let's look at ethnographic research as a case example in Swalkuchi handloom silk weaving cluster. So this particular cluster consists of approximately 30,000 weavers, and it has a historic origin. It has also been mentioned in before Christ era during the period of Chanakya. However, more of the organized way in which we know about it, that origin is traced from somewhere the 17th century when the Ahom kings became patrons of this particular craft. So the field site that we selected was Swalkuchi as the ethnographic context. It is a site which has organically grown So we call is a socio-economic ecosystem, because the social way of living and the economic activities, they are very closely interrelated to each other. Swalkuchi is known for its handloom industry. There are 3 varieties of silk that is being woven over there: Muga silk, Tussar silk and Mulberry silk. Muga silk is golden in color and it originates from Assam. Because people love the original golden color of it, they do not tend to dye the silk. However, the other silk, the Tussar silk, which originates from central India, and Mulberry, which comes from southern India as well as China, they are also woven in Swalkuchi, and those silks are dyed and woven into appropriate designs. The whole sector follows a distributed economy philosophy. What it implies is no one person holds all the design rights. Design is created by individuals, and these individuals are many, and they are free to sell this design to whomever they wish to. Similarly, the manufacturing happens in a distributed manner. So what it implies is there is no centralized manufacturing, no one factory which manufactures the saris or the mekla chadars or other garments. There are smaller industries, cottage industries. Some households have 2 looms, some have 10 looms, and the biggest one has about 50 looms, and some very few have little bit more than that. So the production is very distributed in nature. Everybody performs as a individual entrepreneur and employs weavers, reelers and other stakeholders underneath them. The knowledge is at times transferred from generation to generation, and at other times, because this is a commercial hub for silk weaving, people from across Assam and northeast India come down to this particular place to learn the trade, and they perform the trade. In our ethnographic research, which spanned about a week's stay in the cluster, and we were 8 researchers who stayed over there. We shared protocol for how we will perform this ethnographic research, so that all of us have uniformity in the way we are collecting the data. So it is 5 days multiplied by 8, which is number of hours for which we were performing this activity, multiplied by 8 people. So that is the total number of hours that we spent doing this ethnographic research and trying to understand the cluster. So the first thing is, whenever you try to do ethnographic research, firstly you have to gain entry into that particular community. Ethnographic research is deep immersion, which implies that you have to live with the community, you have to work with the community, and you have to very closely observe them and collect data. Outsiders are not welcome if they try to just go in and start doing this activity. So you need to have a entry point and build rapport with the community, so that they are happy to share, they are not skeptical about you. So in this particular context, in order to gain entry, we targeted local government bodies. There was a local college that, who's one of the professor who was deeply ingrained into the organizational aspects of Swalkuchi cluster as a whole, and was key to getting the trademark and applying for the geographical indicator, also formulating the Swalkuchi cooperative society and bringing in a silk testing center over there. We contacted that person. There was also an innovator called Deepak Bharali over there, living in the same cluster, who had created a mechanism so that creating the motif within motif becomes less time consuming. So this motif within motif is called as a buta, which means if you have a red color flower, then within that if you want to put a green color. So earlier that was a manual process and it would take a lot of time. So he created a mechanism which can be attached so that this time requirement is reduced. However, it is still a handloom machine only, it is not a mechanized solution. So we reached out to these people and explained to them what we are trying to understand, what is the objectives behind our ethnographic research, and if they can introduce us to the next set of people. So in any ethnographic research, it is very important that you gain entry and build rapport first by using local resources who already have very good reputation in the community. Now, in order to build this rapport, we had to do this extended stay in weaver households. That was one option. Another option is if we are living somewhere close by, that also works. In our context, it was not very feasible for the entire 8-member team to live in the weaver households over there. So since it was very close to our university, we would keep going up and down for the entire time frame of 1 week. However, whenever it is feasible, it is a good idea that you start living with the people with whom you are doing the ethnographic research, or try to live very close to them so that you can start your day at the same time as they start their day. So we want to participate in their daily rhythms: morning when they set up the loom, the tea breaks that they are having, the market visits that they might be doing. It might also be very helpful if you learn the local language. In our team, we did have people who knew the local language, and the local people also spoke Hindi to quite a good extent. So even when they are speaking Hindi to a good extent, because their mother tongue is Assamese, it will be good for the entire team to learn at least some Assamese words, some words which are good for greetings and silk related terminology. So when they are speaking, then you understand them well, and the greetings always takes you a long way. It helps in building that rapport, that you being an outsider, you took the effort to learn the language, took the effort to learn the courtesy. That goes a long way in ethnographic research. It builds trust, because it looks like you are reciprocating and you are genuinely interested in what they are trying to do and explain to you. Then comes ethics of documentation, because it is deep immersion. You will be collecting photographs, videos, thick descriptions of their activities. Because you get so engaged in the environment, they might also start telling you things which other participants should not come to know about it, because that might put them into some kind of social jeopardy or other problems. So informed consent is very important for photographing the people, also photographing their traditional motifs, because it might be something which is their speciality and they would not like it to be leaked into to other people. Let's say there is a jacquard punch card that they use for making this design, and that is also something which is very special for them. Then even when you are photographing that, you have to be very careful. So you have to identify all those points where you have to be careful about data protection and data privacy, and you have to take informed consent that I will protect your privacy, your data in this manner, and it will be, all data will be anonymized. It will not be shared with other members of the community, and then take an informed consent. So respecting the intellectual property of patterns, navigating tensions between preservation and exploitation of indigenous knowledge, all of these have to be very carefully thought of in your ethics as well as the documentation of the whole process that you are undertaking. So let's start with how the whole process starts. So we are not looking at how a person's journey. So I might have done the study as how a person's journey starts. But here when I am presenting to you, my audience, I am trying to show how the work happens. Now you might see that in this slide I have sometimes used AI generated images. So that has been done whenever I need to protect the identity of the person or protect the process, because they did not want it to be disclosed. So I created something which gives a representativeness when I am trying to demonstrate it to others. So there is a group of people who are engaged into dyeing the silk. Many a times these people are part of entrepreneur, and most of the times they are not part of it. They are a separate set of entrepreneurs who perform certain activities, which is about heating the dye, the appropriate amount of dye that is required, then using ways to dip the fabric into the dye, and then squeezing out the excess dye, drying it, and then converting it into reels, if that is also part of their business. Now trying to understand what this whole thing about Muga silk meant for that particular cluster, because one of the key speciality of that cluster is weaving the Muga silk. So Muga silk is a kind of an identity for the whole state and for the culture of that particular people. So the golden Muga silk is never dyed because they value it for the golden color. They have stories like, if you put the silk sari under soil and dig it out after 100 years, it will shine more golden. So it becomes more and more beautiful as it ages. So it is passed on as a heirloom from grandmother to mother to daughter and so on. It is an important part of their festivities like Bihu, important part of bridal wear, and it was something which the Ahom dynasty had propagated in a big way. So it is identity of a culture and it is not just a commodity. So there is a huge respect for this particular craft. It was observed that when a lot of spurious materials started coming into the market, so like tussar was dyed in this golden color and being tried to be marketed to outsiders who do not know about the Muga silk as Muga and try to extract that huge amount of money, there was a huge local protest that it is degrading our identity, it is degrading our culture. As a result of which a silk testing center was set up, and in that silk testing center you can identify whether the silk is Muga, tussar, eri or mulberry, and a certification is being given. So now these thick descriptions are possible only because you spend certain amount of time with that community trying to understand what that product is, what are the different values associated with it, what are the meanings associated with it. Now the loom is again a sacred space. Now the sacred has different kinds of meaning. So as somebody who is coming from outside the community, and if I am trying to communicate to the outsiders from the community, I have to use words and I have to explain those words. So why I am calling this as a sacred space? Because the loom occupies the central room of most weaver homes. The loom is not just a tool, it is a heritage, it is a livelihood and family identity. You can see when they are doing this weaving process, there is something which is covering the woven part. So they use cotton towels which protect the silks from sweating hands, and it is a ritual of care. You will see there are many other weaving clusters across the country where weaving happens, but they do not protect the part which has been woven already by using a cotton garment the way it happens over here. Now understanding the motifs. So the motifs also have their own stories. The traditional Mekhla Chadar motifs include stories and regional identities. There are different parts, different tribes in Assam, and these motifs come from different tribes, different time zones, and they all have their identity. There are certain motifs which can be used in certain parts of the garment and cannot be used in other parts of the garment. So each weaver creates their own patterns, translating them to punch card on graph paper. It can be a combination of these, or there are also times nowadays when somebody shares through Instagram, I want this kind of a motif, and then the weaver takes it to a graph maker who tries to see how can I convert this image into an appropriate motif and punch it into graphs. So the motifs carry lot of intergenerational meaning, and in today's day and age it is still evolving with current mediums like Instagram or Pinterest. Then silk as the social bond. So weaving is not merely about production in this community. It structures the family roles. So in Swalkuchi's silk weaving and the activities around silk weaving, the other associated activities are pretty much gender neutral. Anybody who wants to weave, they can weave. It is also pretty caste neutral. So anybody who wants to weave can weave. The festival calendars and the weaving season are all intertwined with each other. The gender norms are shaped according to the social society over there. So as I told you, there is no regulation or no gender specific role over there. The whole idea of community belongingness is very strong. It is an economic activity and is deeply ingrained in the social and cultural ways of living of the people. So now emic versus etic perspectives in Swalkuchi. So what is the emic perspective? Emic means insider's view. Etic is the researcher's view, because I'm a researcher and I'm coming from outside. I might also belong to the community, but still I am a researcher and I have some differences from the insiders who are actually performing the craft. So when I spend these time with the people, I identified that Muga silk is a symbol of Assamese identity, royalty, heritage, never died because its golden color is sacred. As a researcher's view, I will see that premium silk variety with unique natural pigmentation and potential GI tag market value. So both the researcher's viewpoint is important, because now here you have to remember that you are a designer who is doing this researcher. You need to do a design intervention which improves the context of the entire cluster. So as a researcher, I am also seeing this, that it is a premium silk variety, and the most important aspect of it is unique natural color. So where all can it become extremely popular. So the Muga silk is also very popular in Japan for making kimonos. Now jacquard punch cards. Creative expression, each design is personal artistry passed across generations. For the insider view. For the researcher's view, analog programming system, which is the how the punch cards are made. It is an analog programming system. It is design encoding technology with high material waste, because one punch card can be used for making up to 10 saris or mikla chadar, and after that it is no longer useful and it has to be burnt, and a new punch card has to be created with the same design if you still want to make the same design. The weavers' advance payment. So we observe that there is a huge respect and trust on the weavers, and the whole system has a lot of equality between the entrepreneur and the weaver. So the entrepreneur values the weaver's skill by paying upfront. Now from the researcher's point of view, this labor market dynamics is about distributed economy, where there is high bargaining power between all the stakeholders and there is less exploitation. This can also be used in terms of design as a unique selling proposition of the products coming out of this cluster. Then festival season work. So the insider's view is pride and duty, fulfilling cultural demand for silk during the Bihu season or during weddings. Now for a researcher's view, what I see over here is there is a seasonal demand spike, driving production intensity and overtime labor requirement. Can I design something so that there can be a better planning? Or is it possible that given the current scenario, they can also produce for other market outside the local market, outside Assam market, because they are already overloaded, as I can see over here. Distributed production. From the EMIC perspective, there is freedom and autonomy. They can work the hours that they want to work, and they can take a vacation during the festival season. So I can leave one entrepreneur and join another. That is the level of freedom that is enjoyed by the weavers in this particular economy. As an ethic perspective, I see that this is decentralized manufacturing. It is resilient but informal, because the supply chain of weavers, which is the most important thing, is resilient but it is informal, and we have to look at the strengths and weaknesses to create a more resilient, robust system. So I can also use certain kind of cultural probes and contextual inquiry when I am doing this. So say for example, this person is trying to do certain activities and I am observing, and I can also sit and learn. I can also see how intergenerational transfer is happening. I can also look at whether gendered labor performance is happening or not. So in these ethnographic artifacts, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to have some field notes, so daily journals documenting loom rhythms, market interactions, weaver entrepreneur negotiations, seasonal production cycles, capture the texture of daily life in this distributed economy. I will also do photo documentation, where I will do the visual record of the complete silk chain, Muga moth rearing, cocoon collection, reeling machines, dyeing vats, jacquard looms, punch card making, and finished mekla chadors. So this is how the photo documentation works. So you can see from the butterfly and how up till the last product I have done the photo documentation. More photo documentation, trying to show every aspect of it in detail along with the notes. the cultural maps, how it is evolving, how this Swalkuchi silk training, Swalkuchi weaving training institute called as Swalkuchi Institute of Fashion and Technology, how they are trying to evolve new products and new motifs. My field notes will document things like how this silk mark label, how this silk testing yarn is happening, how people are selling the product, and so on. My weavers narratives, where I do the semi-structured interviews with weavers, reelers and other stakeholders to understand their journey. So I came to know about something very interesting. So this is the mechanism which has been developed in order to create. So when I have a red or a particular color pattern, and within that I need another color, so which is called as buta. Earlier it used to take a lot of time to make each buta, but with this particular design it happens in a very short time. It happens in less than 2 seconds. However, it is still not machinery, it is still a handloom process. So the weavers said that we will accept this innovation only if you do not reduce my payment, because the payment was extra if butas had to be made. So because the bargaining power of weavers is quite high, the entrepreneur said, okay, we will not reduce your payment per buta, but please adopt this new technology so that you can weave. So the key ethnographic findings are about silk is identity, not industry. Distributed power enables autonomy. There is tacit knowledge which resists codification. Middlemen exploit information gaps also. So the design implications from this ethnographic immersion are as follows. So I can think about how I will preserve the distributed structure. Any intervention must maintain weaver autonomy and decentralize production and not centralize the control. How will I digitize punch card design so that it becomes easier and I can reduce the waste? How can I build cooperative e-commerce so that middleman exploitation can be reduced? How can I protect the GI tagged heritage which they have gotten? For ethnographic practice, what I can get is prolonged immersion is very essential. Otherwise, I would not have learned everything that I learned. Multi-stakeholder mapping is required because I need to understand the synergies as well as the conflicts. Language is a barrier as well as a bridge, depends on how you use it. AEIU framework enriches the fieldwork. So to understand ourselves as humans, we must understand the cultures that shape us, and that is the main ideology behind ethnographic research. So the key takeaways from this particular lecture are: we have to look at the methodology. Ethnography is a research methodology rooted in cultural anthropology, emphasizing immersion, holism, emic perspective, and thick description to understand culture and meaning. There are 4 principles: immersion, holism, emic perspective, thick description, which distinguishes it from other qualitative research methods. The design adaptation. So design ethnography adapts the classical approach where the time frame has gotten reduced. Our focus is narrower. We are trying to look at product ecosystems versus the whole culture, but we maintain the commitment to cultural understanding. The ethnography reveals meanings, identities and cultural values that drive behavior, invisible in one-off interviews or structured observations. So here are some of the references that you can go through, and that brings us to the end of it. See you in the next lecture.